What is going on, y'all? I'm KM Best. I am a proud believer that Loki is extremely strong and probably deserves a nerf. I am joined by Jeff Hoagland, who absolutely thinks that is not true, or at least that there is no way to know right now. And I guess I just wanted to do this because I feel like the discourse on Twitter has been extremely polarized, right? It's been people saying, oh my God, the game is busted, and people saying, you guys are being ridiculous. You're crying for nerfs. And I was hoping that by getting you and I on, people who have different opinions on this, we could actually have a little bit more of a conversation about why we believe what we believe. And hopefully that would have a secondary knock on effect of like helping people understand why someone like me thinks it's broken and why someone like you would be like, look, it might be, but you can't say that now. And if you are, you're probably overreacting. So, I just wanted to start there and say that I felt that a lot of these sort of response posts from you, people are just like, you guys are being ridiculous, you guys are overreacting. I don't think you've ever said those words, but I felt like a lot of them were basically, I don't think you could ever really go wrong assuming the average card game player is overreacting about the shiniest new thing, except right now. Like that's sort of like, I think 99% of the time your position is going to be the correct one, where it's like, all right, you guys are absolutely overreacting to this new card, but right now I don't think it is. Could you articulate your position in a way that shows a little bit more of the nuance in it?
So, something I think that's interesting about what's going on right now with what Loki's done to the Marvel Stat metagame is that we don't really have a lot of big metagame shifts in Marvel Snap over the first year of what you saw. Like our
Yeah.
past top decks that we've seen, like Bounce and then the little movers deck that popped up, those were like slow buildups to the boiling points where they were like obviously the best deck. And Loki's the first card since High Evolutionary, really, where it showed up and suddenly the format looked very, very different after it arrived. And the big thing Loki seems to be doing to the metagame at an early glance, in my mind, that's made it drastically different, especially for a lot of the people that are playing the game at the top level, is Loki makes it kind of hostile to play good tech cards in your
Yeah.
deck, like Shang-Chi or Killmonger or Shadow King's been popular, because if you play these good tech cards that historically speaking it's been very right to have in a lot of your Marvel Snap decks, suddenly it's the Loki player that's playing them more consistently than you, and it's changed the dynamic of what looks like correct deck building completely with this introduction of a single card.
Right. And I think that that is a great place to start because, to my mind, what it has done to deck building is introduce innate fragility. You can't play any of the cards that beat your deck. You are unable to do that because they will take them. If you're a Cerebro deck, you cannot play Luke Cage. They will take it, and you're relying on Valkyrie and Shadow King, and then it turns off your Valkyrie and your Shadow King. So you can't even play the card that protects you from the variants, right? And then you see like a lot of the decks people are proposing is like, all right, this is the Loki counter. It's, Cerebro 3, which I think actually reasonably does beat it, but it does sort of kind of fall apart if you start trying to beat other decks as the Cerebro 3 player, or if the Loki player starts including Cosmo, it gets a little bit tougher there as well. And then like Hella stuff, which is bad, but I think that's sort of where I'm getting at. Like, you're talking about two decks that had roughly 48% win rates in previous metas that were just totally unable to hold up in the face of things we could still do, and are now being pushed to the forefront because they don't automatically get completely crapped on by Loki. And I don't think that makes for fun metagames when everything is that fragile. I think that's like one of the things that really sticks out to me is like an actual issue with the card is what it does to deck building. It is unique. As a sicko, I'm a little bit compelled by it, but I don't think you want that there for an extended period of time.
Well, so I'm not sure I agree with that point. So it changes the dynamic that Marvel Snap has kind of had since inception, which is like, take the Shuri metagame we had, for example. Shuri
Yeah.
was really good. There were big numbers everywhere. So you wanted to play Shang-Chi because you had to beat big numbers. Loki means that you can't just add a tech card or have a tech card slot in your deck to have counterplay to something. It's you actually have to think about how the tech card that you're playing is impactful back into you because of the dynamic Loki adds. So suddenly we're no longer at this level 0 where matchup bad, tech card good in matchup, ergo I play tech card bad, matchup gets better. Suddenly it's, oh, I need to change my deck in a way that helps the matchup without also hurting me in a different way. And it's a more complex process that's harder to distill and takes more time to work through.
I do agree that it's more complex. I also just think that everything I've put together along those lines is doing something incredibly, incredibly fragile, weak to either its own bad draws or what have you, such that it ends up creating a situation where it pushes the entire metagame towards that like high roll place. And I think that's like the long term effect I would be worried about with Loki. I know a lot of people like to talk about, the Loki mirrors, and that's where the power spikes are, and that's definitely true. I also think that tangentially it does matter when like one of the best decks in your game has mirrors that are complete shit shows. I do think that's like really something you want to avoid if you can. But
I mean,
you feel that way about all mirrors?
for the sake of it, I'm someone like works to avoid most mirrors, and like I
Sure.
loved the little movers deck last season, for example, but
Yeah.
like that mirror was pretty atrocious too. Like whose silk hits which cravens and like ping pongs at the end of the game. There was a lot of similar did they Loki into collector Loki types of roles in those spots.
I mean, I don't think it was that similar. Like the silk stuff you could control with priority, right? If you don't have priority, you play your stuff where you want silk not to be. You could do stuff about that. Like obviously if they start rolling downhill and you don't have your 2s and your 1 or whatever, yeah, you kind of get rolled. But like there's stuff in deck building you can do. You can build to be a wave version of that deck and try to beat mirrors like that. Like but with Loki there's just not really things there. Like it doesn't matter how you prepare. You could do whatever you can to give you an edge. Right now, my mirror tech is like cable, and it's like that's just so I have another roll of the dice to like try and scam. And I feel like that's the last time we had that was what, Dinova, right? That was the last time we were playing crap like that. Like it's just sort of a general bad spot to be in is sort of where my head is at.
To refocus back on the attempting
Sure.
to beat Loki with other decks and that nature, I think one of the things that a lot of players are struggling with when it comes to appropriately attacking Loki is that, in my experience so far, the decks that seem like they are the best into the Loki decks snap and retreat very differently than the other traditionally good decks in Marvel Snap.
Yeah,
Which I
that's
think
actually true.
players that have previously played good decks are having a hard time adjusting how they leverage that mechanic to mitigate the Loki matchup. And what I mean by that is you're correct that the decks that are better into Loki tend to be more high rolly because they're piles of synergy cards that want to leverage high cube games when their synergies come together, and they want to retreat for minimal cubes when those synergies don't happen.
Yeah, they're all Mr. Negative. Like they're not all Mr. Negative, but they're
There
all
are
Mr.
variations
Negative.
of that.
Yeah,
Correct.
like
Yeah.
they're all pretty much just that. Where it's like, all right, you get a bunch of garbage, I get a bunch of good stuff. That's how we play this, right? And for that reason, I will say in my Loki deck, I want to cut Angela Kitty like all the time, but I don't do that because in those matchups where my Loki is actually not getting me good cards most of the time, I just get to play Collector, Angela, Kitty. I'm a fair deck, right? And then if they don't do their like high roll thing, I just win, right? And so that is another thing that I think like I feel like a lot of these Loki decks are like weirdly unpolished. And by weirdly unpolished, I mean like actively bad a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Like people play
think
bad shit.
there's this negative feedback loop with between content creators and high ladder players and people engaging with content where kind of a decision gets made, and in this case the decision was, okay, Loki's busted and we're playing all Loki stuff. And I feel like this kind of tier 0 deck, if you want to call it that, that people are saying could need to be adjusted, skipped the part where it optimized to beat the metagame and jumped straight to the inbreeding, I'm playing cables to draw Lokis, because
Yeah.
suddenly 80% of my matchups were. So like there's this deck that's not even optimized against the field that's now trying to optimize against itself, which makes it hard to figure out, is it even truly busted? Because I don't think a lot of these counter decks that people are playing are even playing into good versions of the Loki deck. Because I think, like you said, there a
Yes.
lot of these versions, they're not good,
They're
but like
awful.
in the mirror, your details don't really matter because the only thing that
Yes.
matters is, did you Loki into their collector and Loki
Yep.
and then steamroll?
Yeah. And so like that's first of all, I'm glad we're on the same page about the mirror because that is just awful. It's just the worst. Like, did you Loki into their collector and their Loki and then do it again? Like,
Yep.
it's awful. It's ass. I do think that even if the card, like, there's a certain point, you hated Galactus, right? And
Yeah.
you hated Galactus because it just turned the game into a non-game. And I feel like I hated Galactus because it was fucking everywhere. And like that's the thing that I hated about it. It was everywhere. And I feel like if Loki gets to something like consistent 10% play rate, the mirrors being bad actually should factor in. Do you disagree with that? Like if the mirrors are that bad, you should do what you can to reduce the play rate of the deck.
I think the quality of the mirror depends on what the difference is between power level between that being like the top deck and the second best deck. Because
Okay.
like if the second best deck is close to that top deck at all and you think the mirror is abysmal, you can just play something else.
Yes.
I really think the mirror being abysmal being a primary deciding factor in things needing to be changed really should only be a consideration if like it's head and shoulders above everything else. And even then, there's another reason why it should be adjusted then.
So for what it's worth, I do currently feel like Loki is head and shoulders above everything else. Like I think like a lot of it is just you got to build the deck reasonably correctly. I think I could be up to 3 cards off at this point, but like right now, a lot of the things people are doing to counter you, like we ran into Shuri Sauron, which is fine, but like you know when you can beat them and when you can't. It's not a hard matchup to figure out. And the Cerebro deck, which is wholly reliant on crushing you with Shadow King and Valkyrie, and Cosmo just really, really gives that deck problems once the Loki deck start including that more reliably. And I guess my worry is that there are all these, high roll decks that are the so-called counters. And there's a certain point at which just playing a normal deck and accepting that you're going to lose to Loki is a little bit better than playing one of those high roll decks. And I don't know when that inflection point will hit, but I really want it to hit soon. Like,
I actually think those high roll decks being good right now is actually one of the better things about Loki changing the format.
okay.
As someone who's tried to play, just for lack of better terms, bad decks competitively in Marvel Snap for the most of my time playing it, those types of decks have really struggled historically, especially in formats like Conquest. And again, I think that shift where these decks are very different and they play the game differently, they snap differently. That's the struggle a lot of people are having with what Loki's doing to the metagame. And I agree with you, by the way, that there will probably be an inflection point where if those decks are actually good against Loki, suddenly the kind of generically good consistent decks that are, beat up on Mr. Negative and Hela, you get that kind of rock, paper, scissors
Yeah.
style thing where the question becomes, okay, is this healthy because like the rock, paper, scissors are 45-55, or is it terrible because the rock, paper, scissors are 30-70 and your matchup's decided at the loading screen?
That's sort of what it feels like to me right now. Is like when I see someone, I'm like, oh, they're playing a normal deck. Like I'm playing Loki and you're like playing Forge. We're good here. Like that's one of the things that really strikes me is it I have not felt this confident seeing like just normal Marvel Snap cards that are good in a very, very long time. And that like I think more than anything else is what worries me about this. Cause like I don't you know me. I'm not prone to overreaction, I would say. Maybe you disagree. I don't really know. I don't think I'm prone to overreaction. I think I'm generally a pretty measured guy. I think, like, again, 99% of the time, when some card comes out and everyone's like, this is busted, they're wrong. It's either like clickbait or they're lying or they're dumb. But this time, I gotta tell you, I really believe it. Like, this is some really, really messed up stuff And I feel like I just went through a metagame where everyone was trying to beat me, and I still came out positive. I gained like 100 snap points today playing Loki against almost everything that is just trying to beat you, right? Everything is just trying to beat Loki or is a mirror. And I'm still feeling really good about the deck, and that has me, I guess, really long term worried about this. Like that doesn't feel like a good situation to be in.
So, and this is, I'm gonna leak our mine and Cam's DMs here a little bit now. So we
Yeah.
talked about this a little bit when we were chatting before we fired up for this recording, and
Yeah.
I think something that's tough about Marvel Snap that makes a lot of this Discord extra muddy to get through is, in my opinion, what I would consider to be good matchup testing largely doesn't exist in Marvel Snap. And what I mean by that is it's hard to really sit down and learn if a matchup is truly good, bad, close, or whatever it's going to be when both players are simply trying to win cubes. I know that that can sound kind of counterintuitive, but something to remember is that two players are basically never evenly aligned in skill. There's always someone getting diffed in one direction or the other. And when you have two players, or random players at that, constantly butting heads on the ladder, with the goal not being to figure out, okay, we're going to play this matchup 100 times and see what happens on average, versus I'm just trying to win the most cubes and snap points here. The incentive isn't figure out good data. The incentive is farm my opponent.
On the subject of good data, I completely forgot about this, but you saying good data reminded me. You made a tweet that was citing the untapped data, and I don't know if you saw my reply, but it is important because Untapped at the time of recording has not updated their filters. They're still
So
using.
for
What is going
the
on with that,
record,
by the way?
my Untapped, yeah, I've actually talked with the Untapped people, and I went back
Yeah,
and forth with them today. When they decide to reset latest patch is weird, because like when they reset it on the 31st as of this recording, I was like, that really wasn't a big change and you shouldn't have reset it. But then like they didn't reset it on the
yeah,
5th when these
yes,
other changes
like
happened
the
and Loki
biggest
happened, and I was like,
change.
that one definitely should have been a reset. But
Yeah,
my point in that post talking about stats or untapped wasn't even talking about specifically matchups so much as it was simply comparing how much average cube gains fall
sure,
off on decks between the
right.
pre-infinite and post-infinite, in part due to the fact that they've sucked, I believe they said, all of the bots out of the
There are
post-infinite
no
world
bots
now.
in Infinite anymore. At least where I'm at, I see them all before Infinite. But I will say, as someone who's used those data websites for a while, I have ignored pre-Infinite data the entire time. Like
Well,
that's just been.
so that's interesting. So in my experience, for reference, what I used to look at on those sites is, in my opinion, before this change of the infinite ladder, I think the 70 to 99 band was
Yes,
actually the one I always put the
like
most weight
8 months
into,
ago.
because
Yes,
correct. Then
yeah,
that's where like
yeah,
this is where people were trying their hardest to win, with 70 to 99, and there were the least bots in that band because the bots
yes.
started falling off in 80 and 90 for most people. But
But they
that's no
made
longer
that
the
change. No,
case anymore.
yeah, that happened. When did that happen? That happened when they first said they took bots off of ladder when they did the 73. Since we've started at 73 after the D rank, right? That was it.
Well, for reference, my last 2 months, I played 50+% bots to infinite between 70
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm saying.
100.
That's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
when that happened, that's when the pre-infinite bots happened for everyone.
Okay. Yeah.
That yeah, like so before that I used to use 70 to 99 data. But when they revamped the ladder to try to fix matchmaking the first time, the one that kind of didn't work, not really sure about that. They ended up introducing a ton of bots to basically everyone at 70 to 99, and that's when it's just like, all right, we have to throw this data out. I can't even use it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's been like that for a couple
It's
months.
well, so one of the things that's interesting about that is you can kind of assume that all of the data is equally skewed by the bots. So you
I don't
basically
think
just
you
like
can.
make the assumption that average cubes and win rates are like all inflated. You're right, there are some decks that like hit like, okay,
Sarah.
this deck farms bots easier,
Specifically
etc.
Sarah.
Sure,
Specifically
Sarah,
Sarah.
the Shuri Kitty and Bounce fall into that category too. The decks
Yes.
that like
Anything
hide
that
their
throws
power
pride.
until
Yeah.
turn 6. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Those decks, like whenever I see someone citing that data, it's like you don't know what you're doing here. Like that one's like
Yeah.
Sarah has been tier 1 on Untapped for untold months where it did not deserve to be tier 1 on Untapped because it farms
Correct.
bots.
I
Like,
always would have people ask me like, why isn't Sarah in your tier? It's like she's
yeah,
not good. Don't
it's
just
ass.
ignore
It's bad.
it.
Like it's but yeah, no, like that is absolutely a thing that I ran up against at the very least, where it was just like, oh man, like it's hard to find reliable data, and it's especially hard when you have to interpret that data. So I guess my thing is, I feel like a lot of people who have been listening to you have taken the message and they've gone like, okay, people that think this is broken are just crying, they're just waiting for nerfs, they're bad, they're not willing to innovate. I I guess my question would be like, how much do you would you agree with that or no? Like, do you think that people are unwilling to innovate and that's the major issue, or do you think that it is, maybe it's
I
strong, maybe
think
it's not, we don't know yet?
I think it's not so much that people aren't willing to innovate so much as people don't know how. I think the deck not only has the deck building process changed, but even just like the goals that people have when they're trying to do things aren't what generate good results. And
Okay.
a funny way to put it is the best results don't care about the actual results of your testing. And what I
No,
mean by that is
that's factual. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, like some of my best like testing sessions historically speaking when I really cared about brewing, I lost more of the games than I won
Yeah.
by a significant margin and walked away and was like, "Yes, this was useful and I understand what works now." And I think it's
Yes.
so hard for a lot of people, especially in your position, right? Where like you're at the top of the ladder and you kind of want to maintain that rank that you're at, but working through and figuring things out in any close to reasonable manner is going to involve incinerating a ton of points just trying to figure out what doesn't work on your way to getting to what could work if it's there. And for the record, there's a chance Loki is correct and there's a chance he needs to be adjusted, but I don't think anybody has a good enough process and has put in the time to come to that conclusion individually. I think
Okay.
there's assuredly data on second dinner's end that they're looking at and they can parse and make an educated decision based on everything that they have. But
Yeah.
from individual siloed perspectives of a single creator or a handful of top creators or a handful of top ladder players, I don't think any of them have done anything remotely close to come to an informed decision independently, just based on what I've seen people streaming alone.
Sure. So what if I told you that I have like a testing group wherein a bunch of top ladder, conquest, etc. players discuss and test matchups and all of that, and the prevailing opinion there is, yeah, this guy's messed up. Like, would that move the needle for you in any way? Still too early?
I
I'm willing to
yeah,
buy
I
that.
guess it really depends on like what the process looks like. And this is something I've kind of had a disagreement with other people in other card games before, because in a lot of other card games, even people just think like slamming ladder matches is appropriate. And
No,
honestly, I
ladder's
think
not testing. That's
well,
ridiculous.
so and I think Snap is even harder than other games I've played in the past to have appropriate testing because of the secondary dynamic that snapping adds to the game,
Okay.
especially in the context of this specific deck where we're talking about the decks that seem like they're the counterplay have this you're trying to get big gains and minimize your losses adds another layer of complexity that makes just proper good testing hard to get at when you can't like control those variables, right? You can't like sit down and have time to talk with the person you're testing about and say, okay, I'm supposed to snap here, yes or no. Okay, you are be for this reason, but you're not for this other reason. Is it statistically correct to do so? There's this rope ticking down, and you can't take back plays where like you suddenly realize, oh, that was a mistake, and now this game is like thrown out because a reasonable player wouldn't make this mistake or a good player wouldn't make this mistake. There's no like rollback or anything like that.
Okay. So I think I've got a better understanding of the shape of your position now. And that's good. It's good that we did this because, like, on stream, I was really heated because I was reading the tweets and I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all, right? Like, I think this is messed up, and I don't think I'm overreacting, right? And I think understanding the shape of your position makes me feel like we're a little closer than we were otherwise, which is like, I think we disagree on the size of the chance. There's a pretty decent chance this card is messed up, but you should not be saying things like, I'm going to quit the game because this card is so broken, right? Like, is that a fair assessment of where we're at?
I mean, honestly, I think if the card is sucking the joy out of the game for you, taking a break or quitting's a fine
Sure.
thing to do. Games should be fun. A lot of the people that I see talking, and this includes you, that are talking, I see talking about Loki. Like, I watch a lot of Snap content in the evenings. Like, they're just playing a bunch of Loki mirrors, and you can't come to the conclusion this is cracked against the field by just like playing a bunch of mirrors. That's just not. It doesn't tell you anything.
They're mostly gone for me. I will say that. Basically, everyone in my Elo bracket has decided that they're going to counter Loki with a variety of decks, the most successful of which seems to be High Evo, for the pure reason that, like, even if it's not that good against Loki, it's like maybe 50%, but it doesn't just like completely roll over and die otherwise, I feel like.
And so an interesting thought, honestly, talking about High Evo, is like that's one of the many cards where like they shave some small little thing off of it and it's still great, but people stop playing it. They make Loki a 3/4. That doesn't change anything, but a bunch of people would stop playing it because they made it a 3/4 because they're like, it's worse. I can't play it anymore because it's worse. And Glenn talks about this a lot too, where a lot of the nerfs that they do, especially via the OTAs, they're psychological more than they're impactful on the statistics. They're we're shaving a point off here or adding a point here because we want people to play this less and we want people to play this one more, and perception is reality in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's the power of the OTA system, is that they can actually adjust play rate. Not long term, but they can adjust play rate minimally. I will say the one time I think they really fucked up trying to adjust play rate was at the Galactus one. They were like, "Oh yeah, we'll make him a 6/2. That'll make people play him less." Like, that one was awesome. Where they're just like, "Oh yeah, we made this card better. Play him less." That's so sick. That one, I think the rest of the time they've been pretty on point in terms of like, let's just make people feel worse about this, right?
And that to tangent on Galactus, that was the beauty of the Galactus redesign, right? They're like, okay, we're gonna make this stat line matter. So if at any point in the future this card's a problem again, we're going to be able to just -1 it, and then people will stop playing it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I do think I'm glad I did this, because I felt like when I came into this, I felt like your position was overly harsh on me personally. I was like, damn, man, he thinks I'm fucking stupid for thinking this card is broken. I was like, okay, he thinks I'm dumb for thinking this is broken. He thinks I'm jumping to conclusions. And I think, here's where I'm at. I think I might be jumping to conclusions, but I also think that I will be borne out correctly. Does that make sense?
I fully expect Loki to get a -1 or some other kind of adjustment based on public perception alone, and I expect it not to really impact the power level of the card, but to impact its play rate, which will be the goal.
I mean, look, that's the dream, but I actually don't expect that to happen. I think they're gonna try other stuff first. I think they're gonna.
It's not going to be Thursday. I don't.
It's not going to be Thursday.
I don't think you're going to see it the 14th. I think they locked in those changes. They lock in those changes a week in advance, and those are locked. Yeah. I think the next OTA after the 14th will be the 28th, and I would be surprised if Loki's not a 3/4 on the 28th, just based on public perception. But
isn't that when Mobius comes out? Like, at that point, I'm not even that worried.
Too, though. Like, that's the other thing too, right? Is like we're kind of living in this temporary timeline that's going to soon get sent back off to the TVA or hedged back in or whatever they say on the Loki show, where Mobius is going to show up and be like,
I think it's pruned. I'm not sure. I think
pruned. Yes,
pruned.
That is it.
Yeah,
Mobius is coming to prune this timeline.
Yeah. Okay. So there is that. All right. So I think we're closer than I originally thought then. Because my original thought was like, far be it for me to be arrogant, but I feel like I'm pretty good at this game and I have a handle on like what's powerful here. And while I don't necessarily think that I have empirical proof of this, I think the direction things have been going because of this card is not good, and I would not like to see them go further in that direction.
For what it's worth, cards on the table.
Sure.
For me personally, the last couple of days playing Loki and then playing a bunch of different anti-Loki decks to moderate success have been some of the most fun I've personally had playing Marvel Snap in the last few months. And that's not an isolated opinion from just me. Like a lot of I think my audience is a lot more casual on average, I think, than a lot of the people that would watch it. Obviously there's some overlap between people that watch both of us, but I think my focus tends to be more casual overall, just like have fun. And Loki does this big sweet thing, and he shifts the metagame in a direction of other big sweet things being better than they've been in a very, very long time.
That's true, right? Like, if you wanted to play Mr. Negative a week ago, I'd be like, don't be stupid. But if you wanted to play Mr. Negative now, I'd be like, all right, well, at least see if it works. Like, at least see if it works, right? That. Like, and I do think there might be something to that, where maybe it's just a card that's not for me as someone who's focused on like maybe there's just a meta that is not going to be good for competitive Marvel Snap, but casual players will just have a ton of fun doing big splashy combos or whatever.
You got to find your Timmy. Okay, Cam? That's what there's a Timmy in there somewhere, and he's looking to put an input into play.
No, dude, I was originally a Timmy. Oh, what's the 1313 from Onslaught that has like you have to sack Croson Cloud Scraper? That was my boy back in the day. Absolutely, without question. All right, so this was a blast. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.